All right? So we're gonna go dive into it. We got a lot to cover today. Why does it seem like these lights are all the way on?
Yeah.
Did you turn them off,
It
Anthony?
does seem
No,
like
ma'am.
over here. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
I hope they can hear me, because it might be difficult to hear me.
I think that's a good point. I think she's gonna need that
I think I'm gonna
microphone
need a
so
mic.
they can.
Okay. Oh, yep.
I'm not sure.
You can use it, but I still got a thing for.
Huh?
I got a mic to pick up more sound too. I'm gonna put my phone.
Because I don't even know if these things work, but
Actually,
it ain't even on, so.
You
What
just
is
plug
that?
that into his phone and make him go.
Oh, okay, well, go ahead and do what you gotta do. Play what you
Nasty.
gotta do. Okay.
Nice.
Well,
I don't like all that
that
set.
sadness.
I'm gonna have to add this out.
Make sure my PowerPoint is going along with me correctly. Of course, it's not.
So purdy.
Yeah, I like that purple.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about the kings. All right.
Yes.
Here is our agenda for today. We did the welcome. For those of you that were running a little bit late, welcome, getting food, everything. We'll do a little bit of an opening prayer again, and then we'll go into handouts, the statement of the lesson, the review of 1 Kings. I have a video for you guys. We'll go over some terminology, talk a little bit about the lesson, and then comments, suggestions, questions, review, closing prayer. This is a lot. I just have to tell you
Wow.
that I'm up to the task.
Wow.
But 2 Kings is rich.
Mm-hmm.
It's different from 1 Kings. 1 Kings flows a little bit, has a little more fluidity to it.
Yeah.
But 2 Kings is all over the place.
All over the place.
And so we're going to talk about that. I got lots of handouts. Let me just inform you. These handouts will be good for the rest of the study.
Wow.
Okay? So bring them with you. Bring them with you. I'm going to have Ariel be my hander-outer. Okay. Mr. Tim, you want to do a quick prayer real quick,
Yes, ma'am.
please?
Yes, ma'am. Lord, we just thank you. I thank you for all you're doing
Yes, God.
in our midst, Lord, for the blessings that you are pouring out upon each and every one of us, seen and unseen. I just thank you for bringing us all safely here.
Yes.
And I just thank you for Sister Taya and for all you do through her, Lord, and for Apostle,
Yes, God.
and for the way that they allow you to move and have your way with them. And because of their obedience, so many are blessed, Lord. And I just thank you. I just pray you continually uphold and keep them, strengthen them for every task that is before them, for every challenge that they are facing. I thank you for giving them foresight and clear direction on what to do in each situation. I thank you for this lesson that is about to go forth. And as it does, I just pray you move Sister Taya out of the way and just speak directly through her. Open our hearts to receive what it is you have for us today, Father.
Yes.
And thank you for just blessing this time. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Okay. Amen. So as I hand these out, I will explain them as my hander-outer.
Andrew out there.
Hand out the handout. This first handout is a reading plan for you to read daily through the 2nd books of Kings. Aaron created this for us so that we don't have to read like a whole chapter the day before Bible study or whatever the case. You can read a little bit at a time every day. So you hand that out for me. I take that. Yeah, it's not working. I know. Elijah, come in. I got you the handout. Come here.
Here we go.
Come on. This second page I'm handing out is a syllabus for our 2nd book of Kings for you guys to keep and to understand that. So it kind of gives you a little bit about what we'll be going over. Y'all be ready for these papers. I kill a tree, yes. I do. my daughter, she's watching me. She's like, Mom, you kill the tree.
Thank you.
I do initially kill the tree. I do kill the tree because I have the job of doing the introduction to the book. The teachers, they more so can get a little bit more individualized and have a little bit more fun. I have a large scope to cover. And so to give you guys the information to do it, I kill the tree. Okay?
There it is.
This here is the breakdown of weekly, what we will cover, what chapters we will be covering. Now listed on the sheet is your, we call them veteran teachers that have been doing it before. And so, but this quarter, we will have some newbie teachers too. So don't be surprised if you see some new faces intertwined with some of the old faces, okay? All right, pass that out for me, please. So that's what's going around for every Tuesday, and we will meet until November 12th is the last class
That's funny.
for this particular session for the Second Kings. We'll be done with Second Kings. That is a miracle.
Wow. Yes,
To be
amen.
done with Second Kings by November 12th, because there's like 25 chapters. I'm trying to tell you. So we gonna be working it. That means I pray to God y'all be reading. It's definitely necessary. So this, which I'm handing out first, okay, is kind of a summary of First and Second Kings, because it's kind of hard to differentiate the two books, because they were originally one book. They got broken up into two books when it was being translated into Greek in the scrolls, because in the Hebrew, the scrolls fit on one scroll, and it's just called the Book of Kings. It's just called Kingdoms. Actually, it's called Kingdoms. But when you take out and add all the extra letters for the other language, it ends up in two scrolls. So that's how they divided it into First and Second Kings. Okay. Originally, First and Second Kings, like I said, was one book, and it was called Kings, Kingdoms. It was grouped with First and Second Samuel and First and Second Chronicles. Okay, and it was technically called the History of the Kings. And so, in the Hebrew Bible, though, they originally put it as a book called the Former Prophets. And the reason why they did that is because it is believed to be written by prophets, along with Samuel, who was a prophet, and Chronicles, who is Ezra, which is a priest, right? And so they believe that Jeremiah is the person that wrote First and Second Kings, but there is some argument to it. So it's not for sure, but they believe that for the majority he was there. But Jeremiah was exiled to Egypt at the time of Jerusalem's exile, so there was some things that was added after his exile. But for the most part, they do think that it was written by Jeremiah. This form here, I handed out when I did First Kings, and it is actually on the front, it's the kings of Judah, and on the back is the kings of Israel. And it says the scriptures where their names are mentioned. So Aria, will you hand that out for me, please? I'm working you, girl. I'm working you. I'm working you, girl. So I want to make sure that you guys are loaded, locked and loaded. Okay? Because Kings is like fulfillment of prophecy and also talking about what is to come.
Amen.
So you have to know Bible history, but you also have to know about the character of God. So, Elijah, you want to get your butt over here? You ain't here? I'm like, where's my other person? This next sheet that I'm handed out is the name of all the prophets with where they can be found in particular scripture in the book of 2 Kings. And then on the front page is a little bit, it's kind of hard to read, but it talks about the difference between Elijah and Elisha, which is definitely something to be discussed, and we'll kind of hit about that in a little while. Thank you. Okay. Now, finally, well, I ain't not finally, I'm saying it like that's the end. That ain't the end. I got a book for y'all here, okay?
Finally.
This page is about the prophets lined up with the kings. You can see which prophet would go with which king directly. And it's kind of in a different format on the front and then a table on the back. Because I know we have different styles of learners. So I want to make sure that I hit every type of learner. So think. So that's what's going around now. And you do not have to put them in any particular order. If I use them today, I will hold up the sample to say, look at this page. So it doesn't have to be in a particular order, no. Adrian's like, oh my gosh, she's killing me.
Loading us down.
It's a lot.
You didn't tell us to bring a backpack. You didn't tell us to bring a backpack.
I can't be prepared. I ain't playing.
Woo! This should just stay. And you know how many, Pastor was telling me how many books he got? He has like books for everything.
Yeah.
This should be your Bible study folder book. Okay, now this handout here is kind of a summary of the things that happen in 1 Kings and the things that happen in 2 Kings. And then it talks about some events in 2 Kings. Like I said, I kind of present it in two different ways because we got two different, we got multiple styles of learners. And this way you have it as you're reading. You can go ahead and reference. I know a lot of people like PowerPoint because it's nice and pretty and everything like that, but it stays here.
Right.
These you can read when you're reading your daily reading and be like, where was this at? Megiddo? Yes, I said Megiddo. Where is this? How does this go? So you have it with you. I'm trying to tell you. Now this last page, I do say finally. You love it. Finally, it's a map of Israel and Judah. Okay? It's two different versions of the same map. Okay, so we can understand it. Don't lose this. Do not lose this because you're going to need it throughout 2 Kings. They're going to be Roman. They're going to be conquered. There's going to be fights. There's going to be civil war. Where it's supposed to be. Because a lot of times when we're reading the Bible, it's kind of like we blink and think they got there the next day.
It's true.
And they didn't get there the next day. It took some time for this to happen. And so you can kind of see, even though it's not like to scale, but you can kind of see how they travel in distance. Thank you, Elijah.
How many pages should we have?
How many
By the
pages?
time you're done handing
About
this all
6.
About 20.
It's not 20. Okay, I'll tell you.
Infinity.
It's not too.
And beyond.
And just when you think
So,
you're done,
okay,
there
there's
goes
like
all.
1,
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 5,
25.
I got you 6.
6, 7, 8, and then the little staple.
I told you,
All right,
29.
y'all got that?
28.
Okay.
30.
You took the whole bread, huh?
I took the whole way.
Whoa.
So everybody got their handouts.
Yeah.
Ready with the handouts?
Yeah, I got
Man, I have most of them.
Anyway, so you might have mine.
I got one.
Everybody got them? For those that are watching on video, if you want the forms, text me. If you don't have my number, email me, anthony@gmail.com. I'll get them to you. Or if you come to church on Sunday, you can here. You can pick them up on Sunday.
Come to church.
Copies, okay?
Did you get one?
So everybody got those? Now, we're gonna go into a little bit of a statement on the lesson. Like I said, we're gonna review 1 and 2 Kings. And we're gonna talk about it for a minute. Everybody got that? Let me pull up my. Everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
We got 8, so we're short 1.
Yeah, that. All right. Hopefully, is it sound on this?
Second Kings. Although they're
Nope.
two separate books in our
It should be on the TV, right?
You see introduction.
You go.
Okay.
Alexi.
You can go through this path right here.
Ty, did you want us both to do the observation or just Aaron?
It does not matter to me. Okay, so I'm hoping this relays
She's
to.
like, what am I
Memorize.
Minister Ty.
Grab all the Jesus.
Pastor Ty.
It doesn't make
Yeah,
it.
one of you.
Just,
Doesn't matter. You are Aaron.
oh, okay.
I'm hoping.
the books of First and Second Kings.
Oh, great.
Technical difficulty.
It's not hooked up for the speaker.
I know, that many get too good. I mean, it's not. Right.
How do I get a speaker for it so that it?
Trial and error. Trial
Is your
and error.
Bluetooth hooked up?
Unless I do it on a microphone.
Well, how's your Bluetooth hooked up?
It's not hooked up to the Bluetooth. It's about this. I mean,
Should just
do
put,
this on Bluetooth?
Oh,
It's on my computer.
is you, you have a Bluetooth hooked up?
I don't know.
you know, visual and audio.
It's
God bless you.
this usually back there, so it's kinda difficult.
Yeah, you should have Bluetooth on that laptop.
Where's Rebecca?
The Bluetooth share. Let me see.
Yeah, I got
Where's your?
At home.
Okay. Chilling?
In her bed.
Chilling like a villain.
Sit in her bed. You got very detailed.
Hey, it's like that sometimes.
Why didn't you get it?
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful with it because I was trying to read that.
Is my Bluetooth on?
That'll help a little bit. It was kind of that's what triggers it.
Okay.
That's on Bluetooth. I told her she got a Bluetooth.
Does she have Bluetooth?
Oh, yeah, I turned it down, it was on 3, I turned it down.
Okay, so I'm a fair warn y'all that it might be a little behind, but for the most part, because I'm playing it from the video here, it should be the same.
The books of First and Second Kings. Although they're two separate books in our Bibles, they were originally written as one book telling a unified story that continues on from the book of Samuel
Yes.
came before it. So David has unified the tribes of Israel into a kingdom, and God promised that from his line would come a messianic king who would establish God's kingdom over the nations and fulfill the promises made to Abraham. So the book of Kings tells the story of the long line of kings that came after David.
It's a one of those days.
Just one of those things.
Just one of those days. One of those days. Thank you.
When you really should leave me all alone.
It's not on there at all.
You got a
Why
fanny
is it
pack,
not
girl,
on
it's
there?
80s.
Girl, I love me some fanny packs.
What?
I said, I love
There
me
Okay,
we
yeah,
go.
we got it. We got it. There you go.
This is,
You can start it from the top. It finally popped up.
yeah. Oh, is that what you said with it?
Mm-hmm.
Can it
Yeah,
play
it just popped up.
TV?
Like,
I was trying that and it wasn't doing it.
Oh, either, I need
I tried.
Dutchie Reed and.
Hey, Bible Project.
Okay. Give it a shot.
2 hours out.
How do you want it?
You need to take it off.
The books of 1st and
It's
2nd
on
Kings.
there.
Although they're two separate books in our Bibles, they were originally written as one book telling a unified story that continues on from the book of Samuel that came before it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So David has unified the tribes of Israel into a kingdom, and God promised that from his line would come a messianic king who would establish God's kingdom over the nations and fulfill the promises made to Abraham. So the book of Kings tells the story of the long line of kings that came after David, and none of them lived up to that promise. In fact, they run the nation of Israel right into the ground. The book is designed to have 5 main movements. The story begins and ends focused on Jerusalem. First with Solomon's reign and the construction of the temple, and then in this last section ending with Jerusalem's destruction and Israel's exile to Babylon. And the story leading up to this tragedy is what makes up the center 3 sections, which explain how Israel split into 2 rival kingdoms, how God tried to prevent the corruption of Israel by sending the prophets, and how exile became the unavoidable consequence of Israel's sin. The book opens with 2 chapters about the kingdom passing from the aging David to his son Solomon. And David's final words to Solomon, they're very similar to those of Moses and Joshua and Samuel to the people. It's a call to remain faithful to the commands of the covenant and to give allegiance to the God of Israel alone. But David's words ring somewhat hollow here, because David and Solomon then go on to conspire how they're going to consolidate this new kingdom through a whole series of political assassinations. It's not off to a great start. Solomon's brightest moment comes when he asks God for wisdom to lead Israel, and he even completes David's dream to make a temple for the God of Israel. Here the story actually stops and describes the design of this temple in detail, just like the tabernacle design in the Torah. There's all these gold and jewels and depictions of to the Garden of Eden. It's the place where heaven and earth meet, where God's presence dwells with his people. But no sooner does Solomon finish the temple than he makes some really horrible choices and the kingdom falls apart. He starts marrying the daughters of other kings, hundreds of them, for political alliances. And then he adopts their gods and introduces the worship of those gods into Israel. Solomon then accumulates huge amounts of wealth. He builds a huge army. He even institutes slave labor for all of his building projects. Now, if you go back to the Torah and look at God's guidelines for Israel's kings in Deuteronomy 17, Solomon is breaking every one. So by the time that he dies, Solomon resembles Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, more than he does his father David. The next section of the book opens with Solomon's son, Rehoboam, acting just like his father. It's a very sad story of greed and lust for power. He tries to increase taxes for slave labor. And under the leadership of Jeroboam, the northern tribes reject this, they rebel and secede, and form their own rival kingdom. And so now in the story, you have the southern kingdom, Judah, centered in Jerusalem with kings from the line of David, and now this new northern kingdom called Israel, whose capital will be Samaria eventually. Jeroboam also goes on to build 2 new temples to compete with Solomon's temple in the south. He puts a golden calf in each one to represent the God of Israel. The connection to Exodus 32 and the golden calf, it's all quite explicit. From this point on, the story goes back and forth from north to south, tracing the fate of both kingdoms. Each one had about 20 successive kings, and as the author introduces each king, he evaluates their reign by a few criteria. Did they worship the God of Israel alone, or did they promote the worship of other gods? Did they deal with idolatry among the people? And did they remain faithful to the covenant like David, or do they become corrupt and unjust? And according to these criteria, the author finds no good kings in northern Israel, 0 for 20. And then in southern Judah, only 8 out of 20 get a positive rating, which connects to another huge purpose in this book, and that's to introduce the role of the prophets, key figures in Israel's history. So in the Bible, prophets were not fortune tellers. Rather, they spoke on behalf of the God of Israel, and they played the role of covenant watchdogs, which means they called out idolatry and injustice among the kings and the people. They were constantly reminding Israel of their calling to be a light to the nations, that they should obey the commands of the Torah, and so the prophets challenged Israel to repent and follow their God. In these center sections, for each king, God then raises up prophets to hold them accountable. The most prominent prophets are the northern ones, Elijah and his disciple Elisha, right here in the center of the book. Elijah was a wild man of a prophet living out in the desert, and his arch nemesis was the northern king Ahab and his Canaanite wife Jezebel. Together, these two had instituted the worship of the Canaanite god Baal over Israel. And so in a famous story, Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal to a contest to see which god was real. So they both built altars and prayed to their gods, but only the God of Israel answers with fire. After this, Ahab uses his royal power to murder an Israelite farmer and then steal his family's vineyard. And Elijah again confronts Ahab's injustice, and he announces the downfall of his house. Elijah eventually passes the mantle of his prophetic leadership to a young disciple named Elisha, who asks for 2 times the authority of Elijah. And what's fascinating here is how the author, he's recounted 7 miraculous feats for Elijah, and then he offers stories of 14 acts of power from Elijah. Both prophets were clearly remarkable men, and they played the same role, confronting Israel's kings for idolatry and injustice. And ultimately, they were unsuccessful in turning Israel back from apostasy. In the next section, the northern kingdom is rocked by a bloody revolution started by a king named Jehu, who destroys Ahab's family. And although Jehu was at first commissioned by God, his violence just gets out of control, and it creates the spiral of political assassinations and rebellions from which Israel never recovered. Coup follows coup after Jehu, and each king follows other gods, allows horrible injustice. It all leads up to 2 Kings chapter 17. The big bad empire of Assyria swoops down and takes out the northern kingdom altogether. In the capital city of Samaria, it's conquered, and the Israelites are exiled and scattered throughout the ancient world. Now, chapter 17 is key. The author stops the story and offers this prophetic reflection on what's just happened. He blames the downfall of the northern kingdom on the idolatry and covenant unfaithfulness of Israel and its kings. And so, God has allowed them to face the consequences of their decisions. The final movement of the book tells the story of the lone southern kingdom. And here we meet some very heroic kings, like Hezekiah, who trusts God when the armies of Assyria come knocking on Jerusalem's door. Or Josiah, who discovers this lost scroll of the Torah in the temple. So he starts reading it. He's convicted, and he institutes religious reforms to remove idolatry and Canaanite influences from the land. But Judah is just too far gone. The king, right in between these two, Manasseh, he's the worst by far. So he not only introduces the worship of idol statues into the Jerusalem temple, he also institutes child sacrifice. And so God sends prophets to say, the time is up. Israel has reached the point of no return. The final chapters tell the story of the Babylonian Empire coming to invade Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and carry the people and the royal line of David off into exile. And so the story ends leaving us wondering, is God done with Israel? Is he done with the line of David? Well, the final paragraph zooms about 40 years forward into the exile, and it tells a very releases him from prison and invites him to eat at the royal table for the rest of his life, and the book ends. So it's not much, but it's a story that gives a glimmer of hope that God has not abandoned the line of David. So the question now is, how is God going to fulfill his promises to Abraham, to David? How is he going to bless the nations and bring the Messianic kingdom? And to answer those questions, you have to read on into the wisdom and the prophetic books. But for now, that's the book of Kings.
Okay,
Bible project.
that was
That was good. I like that.
It was a little different, right?
It was good, yeah.
If we can get the audience to go, we'll be all right. But you know, hey, I tried for all my visual people.
That was good.
That was great.
I tried.
The drawing is flawless.
I like it too. Yes, I do. Okay.
That was a quick synopsis.
So, it allowed me to eat my food too, right? So we kind of went over that, and the review included both 1st and 2nd Kings. It is hot. So to talk about that, so just a couple different things as we go into this and we understand this. When you are reviewing Kings, the first thing you want to make sure, and I have included this, no, this is probably gonna just make a noise, but, can you see that? Can you guys see that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Deuteronomy, it says Deuteronomy.
Yeah, it's up there. It
Not
needs to be,
big, but
it needs to be,
it's up there.
needs to be popped up. But
Yeah.
Let's see. I just love this technology stuff.
Right. It's getting on my nerves today.
There we go.
The recording too.
It
I said
is.
it is
It
recording.
is.
Camera's
Like, can y'all
tripping.
see that there?
yep, that's good.
That's
Yeah,
better.
that's
All
better.
right.
Oh
So
my
when you
goodness.
are reviewing Kings, the book that you want to do, remember, is Deuteronomy. And the reason is because that's where the law is coming from, that the prophets are convicting them over, stating over them. They are quoting from Deuteronomy, okay? There are some scholars that say Deuteronomy was actually written at the time of the kings as opposed to with the first 5 books, okay? I don't believe that because it's just thorough, goes into the depth and everything. So Deuteronomy, though, is what is the accountability for the kings. So when the prophets are coming to them and saying, you're not doing this, this is what you should be doing, God's going to do this, it is all based upon the law that is written in Deuteronomy. So for my scholars, my experts, okay, if you want to read the book of 2 Kings along with Deuteronomy to see which laws the kings are breaking, be my guest. Be my guest, okay? Now for those that are just looking to have a little challenge in their life,
Get
what
married.
Yikes.
that was just a little bit of
Yikes.
challenge. I encourage you to read the prophets along with 2 Kings so that you can see which king is being addressed, what the prophet is actually saying. It gives you an idea of the culture and the time. That's why that sheet that I handed out that has the prophets listed there with the kings lined up is the funny looking one. This one right here.
Funny one.
Okay, it tells you the name of the prophet that is with that particular king. So if you look at the kings of Judah, I know that, let's say, Josiah is a king that I love because that's my
Me
nephew's
too.
name. Okay, Jeremiah is there with Josiah. So if you were wanting to be challenged, you can read the book of Jeremiah along with the 2 Kings. That's a lot. But I'm telling you. On the back, it tells you different other prophets in the particular chapters that goes along with it so you can get an understanding of that. For those that want to read like the whole picture, okay? In case you have a little bit of free time. Just saying. But that is where it's coming from. Generally, when you do teach about prophets, or we teach prophet school or school of prophets, they tell prophets you better memorize the book of Deuteronomy. Because the word hasn't changed. The law was fulfilled, but all Jesus did was summarize it up. So the message is still the same. And so that's what the prophets should be coming from for today. Okay? So that's for you to know. Now, that's just a little light reading. Everybody said light reading. Okay, so, but there's a couple different things you have to keep in mind when you're reading Kings. One is David, as with our PowerPoint, our presentation mentioned. David, for some reason, is the one that God chose. He is the man after God's own heart, even with all his flaws. So when it comes to kings in the Bible, they are judged off of David's behavior. Okay? If they're like David, they're a good king. If they're not like David, they're evil. Okay? That's your plumb line, biblically speaking. God uses the plumb line with the prophets for Deuteronomy, but he uses David as the plumb line for the kings. Either you will be a good one like your father David, or you're going to be evil. Okay? And so that's how it is basically judged. The reason why it's judged in that way is because David followed, for the most part, after God's heart. He tried to abide to the best of his humane ability to be like what God said to be like. Fell short a couple of times, but for the most part, he did try to do that, okay? So you want to keep in mind, that's what they're being judged off of. Now, the promise that's made in Judah Okay? Because as it was said that it splits to Israel and Judah, okay? This is northern and this is southern. That you can see on the map that I handed out with the 2 pictures of the map. And you can see it on either page, okay? It's broken into northern and southern, Israel or Judah. Israel or Judah, okay, is also, Judah is based because David, the line will never leave Judah. So, what that means is these kings do not have to be of David's line. These kings do have to be of David's line. So there is a succession that and we'll get to a little later, when they're being introduced in each chapter, their father is mentioned to say how they're connected to David. These are won by war. There's people that just stand up there and be like, I'm the king now, you're going to follow me. It is not connected at all to David. Okay? Now, for the most part, there's all kings mentioned. Okay? They're all kings. Except for one. There is a queen in the Bible. And no, it's not Herodias or Jezebel, but it's Queen Attila.
Right.
And she reigns in Judah.
She's something else too.
And she is evil.
The epitome thereof.
She's evil. And so I'm excited when we get to that. But she is evil. I mean, evil.
makes
Like,
Jezebel
I killed my
look like-
son so I can be queen.
Right.
Evil. I killed my grandsons so I can be queen. But she's queen of Judah and she's not from the line of David. So that is the one time that there is someone in royalty that is reigning over Judah who is not from the line of David.
David, wow. Wow.
As a matter of fact, she's from the line of Ahab.
Whoa.
She's Jezebel's daughter.
Oh.
Oh, that's right.
So y'all get excited for her when we get to her. She'll tell you how to really run it, you know. So, just a little background on that and how it's broken down. Any questions on that particular part? 'Cause that's foundational. You won't be able to understand the book of Kings if you don't understand 2 Kings, if you don't understand it. Yes, Willie?
Yeah, as far as the prophets is concerned, what page is that specifically found that I could find and lined up with Deuteronomy and the certain prophets? Because I know you just like right when you put Deuteronomy and then you put you have to, if you want to dig deeper besides going into Deuteronomy, then you have to dig also into the prophets that follow along in the same time as the kings.
Yes.
So I was just curious as to
There's a, I'll give it to you because it's really Deuteronomy, and it's on the bottom here, it's 28.
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Deuteronomy 28 will say that. But if you read 1 Kings, and when Solomon is asking for wisdom, God says, I will dwell here in the presence of this temple as long as you follow these things. If you don't, I'll cause drought, I'll cause dissension, I'll cause separation, and my presence will leave. So it's also reiterated in the first book of Kings. He told them flat blunt, when they stop following me, when they stop, and that's when Solomon takes over, I believe it is chapter 2. Is it chapter 2 where he takes over? It's right when he's asking God and praying for wisdom. So that's what that is, okay? Now, remember that I said that these 2 books were originally called the Book of Kings, the Acts of Kings. Kingdoms is what it's called.
Gotcha.
We call it kings because that's how we look at it. How do we define a king?
Someone in charge.
Someone in charge,
Someone in authority. Royalty.
someone in authority. What do we base it off of?
Bloodline.
Money.
Bloodline.
Inheritance.
Bloodline. The inheritance.
Land.
Land.
America doesn't have a king.
No.
Because our land doesn't have kingdom. In the United Kingdom, they really don't even follow a king because the queen is Elizabeth.
Yes.
It's a queen. But really who's in power is the parliament. But they have it established that there should always be a monarchy. Right? So we base it off land. when we look at kings, we say this king is the ruler over what land? Spain, Australia,
Right.
whatever the case may be. Well, in the Bible, the Hebrew term is not based upon that. It is not based upon, it's called Melachim or something. Phew. But it's not based upon that. It is based upon the characteristic of the king. So what it's saying is that the king's reign is his character.
Wow.
So, and I was having this discussion with my daughter because I said, when we say the kingdom of heaven is here, we're referring to God's kingdom.
It's characteristics.
And so his characteristics should be here. Because love should be here, grace should be here, mercy should be here.
There it is.
And so essentially the way that heaven is here is because his kingdom is here. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is both here and is to come. Because the characteristics of the king, and that's how it's viewed. It's viewed upon his dominion, meaning that reign stops when that king stops reigning. So it's the end of king. So that's why they can view it as the acts of the kings, not just kings. Because it doesn't essentially list. It is based upon each king. Which is why it would be deemed good or evil. Because that king is leading the people to do good or leading the people to do evil. And so when you're looking at it, you are looking at the sovereignty, like how did they get in position? Well, nobody else challenged their power. They won everything else. They reign over it all. But the dominion, meaning how they reign in their characteristic. And that's how the Hebrew term is defined with king.
That's deep.
It's a little different from ours, right?
That's very
It's a
different.
little different.
Wow.
I mean, to me, that means that when Jesus came and established the kingdom, and he did what he did, he was essentially establishing the kingdom then. When he gave his life and became a curse for the people, and he died for his people to follow him, and he set the record straight, man, that's an awesome king.
Wow.
That is an
Amen.
awesome
It is.
king, right?
That's good.
And so you have to understand that when we're talking about that, we're talking about the reign, not the land.
Got
Okay.
you. That's good.
When they introduce the king, one of the things they do is say where he reigned from.
Right.
Not that he was necessarily over that whole land, but where he
Mhm,
reigned
where he's
from. And so that's part of the introduction. Okay? So that's something to know about the second book of Kings. The other thing is to know is that this book is not a chronological book. It's not just first his son, next this son, next this son. It does not go like that at all. It actually bounces back and forth to show the correlation between the Israelite king and the Judean king. Okay? And it shows that because they were at civil war. It was civil war going on and constant turmoil. And when there wasn't civil war, they would gang up and actually keep out the people that were trying to come against them. But you can kind of see through as we will read it, the times in which they battled each other.
Wow.
Okay? This is why it makes it necessary to state who the Queen Mother is. So one of the things that will happen, we'll go this way. Okay? Okay, Israel does not state who the Queen Mother is when they're introducing the king. When they say King Jehu, who is on the throne for this many years, it doesn't state who his mother is. In Judah, it states who the mom is. It's important for them to state that, so the connection is that in spite of they're from David's line, because remember they're David's kin, but the mom comes in. How does the mom have to do with this? What's the influence of the mom? Is the mom from Jerusalem herself? Hello, Attila. So you get to see, and so they look at it, and this is where the importance of the matriarch comes in the picture, because the mom has the influence. What does Solomon say? Heed your father's instructions, and you keep your mother's ways.
Yeah.
That's the proverb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in honoring and keeping the lineage for Jesus, that's why it's going to be done. The other reason why it's to be done is because who's Jesus' mama? Mary. Right? Okay. Mary is from the line of David.
Mm-hmm. Sure is.
In Luke, it says Mary's line. In Matthew, it says Joseph's line.
Mm-hmm.
They're both from the line of David.
David. That's right.
So it's still keeping with identifying who Jesus is.
Right.
His mama was from Jerusalem. Okay, so you gotta understand that. Let's see here. Prophets are important in 2 Kings. Like I said, they're the plumb line. They're the plumbers. You done clogged up here. You done clogged it up. We gotta take this drain out. You costing us. You're taking us into the wrong place. So prophets are important all throughout. Not just Elisha and Elijah, but there are other prophets that are coming to say things. Elisha and Elijah are important because they were the predominant in the second book of Kings, okay? They were the ones that did the miracles. Let me put it that way. The books of prophets that are written, they're not doing miracles. They're stating, you're clogged up. You need to change this. You need to do this. But Elisha and Elijah were doing miracles just as Samuel, just as Moses. And so there you kind of see the end and the change of the types of prophets. They're considered classical because they're leaders. So one of the things that takes place in the book of 1 Kings is Elijah anoints Elisha as his successor per the instruction of God. So what established Elijah established schools of prophets. So that he made available training for students to do schools of prophets. Samuel was the first to institute that. Elijah followed after Samuel in putting schools of prophets throughout different cities. And so in putting schools of prophets, naturally the successor would be named as who is the most, the best, who's the baddest, right? Who is the one that can do it all? But God nipped that in the bud when he said, go get Elisha, who had not been at the school of prophets.
That's right. So get it
And
twisted.
so you kind of see there where God is like, I got my plan. I don't need you. And so what happens in the case of Elisha and Elisha, and you kind of heard it on the screen, is that Elijah did primarily like 7 miracles. Okay? Elisha did 14.
Yep.
Double portion. Elisha tells Elijah that if you are with me when I leave, you will receive a double portion. And we see that Elisha is with Elijah. That represents
Faithfulness.
That represents firstborn.
Oh, yeah.
That represents firstborn. In the Bible, the firstborn gets a double portion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what Elijah is doing is handing over the mantle, his anointing in the double portion. The firstborn gets the double portion. Hi, Tierra. The firstborn gets the double portion. And that was what Elijah was showing to Elisha. So it's no wonder that Elisha was able to do the double than Elijah. But there was people that were still prophets around Elisha, and he had to show that he was present at the time. Okay? So you kind of see that there in the double portion mantle as one of our key terms. Let me see here. I talked about the sons of prophets, which is what is called for Elijah's school. I think it's the company of prophet is for Samuel's school. Slightly different things like this, but they're all still schools. A reign, I discussed that, is based upon the king and how he reigns and how long the term is. He reigned, that is what it is, how long he was in dominion over for the kingdom. Let's see here. Baal and Ben blank I put up there because we know Baal to be a god they worshiped, right?
Right.
But it also is a title.
Yep.
So in the book of 2 Kings, you will see a lot of people who have names such as Baal Peor, Baal something else, Baal such and such. And it means Lord over something. Whatever the particular, like Baal Peor is Lord of the mountain. So basically they gave sacrifices to this Lord of the mountain. But he took the title. So a lot of times Baal something is a title, such as Pharaoh was a title. Such as Xerxes was a title. There was different titles that was passed to different kings. And so Baal is something that if your name is attached to a Baal, hyphenated, they put you in position of God. Even though you're an actual person. Just like pharaohs were put in position of God. Right? Just like Xerxes, I am God. Y'all saw 300. Come on now. He was like, don't you know I'm God? You don't challenge me. That's the titles that they've carried. Ben hyphen whatever the case is also a title. So Ben Hadad, okay, means son of such and such. But it's viewed as God. He's king. They like to view kings as God. Okay? So that's, I think, our terminology. Any questions? Kind of summarize it real quick, ran through it real quick. Any questions on those?
Just want to make a comment going back to the prophets. Isaiah. You know, Elijah. The two miracles that each one done was they both brought a boy back to life.
With Elisha and Elijah?
Yeah.
Well, Elisha was bad though. He did a lot of miracles.
Right.
Because the axe floating on the water.
Yeah.
His bones causing people to come back to life. Yeah.
That's wild.
Elijah calling down people by rains of 50, striking dead. You can't come over this mountain. They were some bad boys.
They were.
They were some bad boys. You know. Some key people in 2 Kings is we talked about Elijah and Elisha. Elisha is primary at the beginning of the book, and you see him as he passed away. There will other prophets arise that'll say the different things. Elijah is passing away in first chapter of 2 Kings. Then you have Naaman, who actually Elisha performed a miracle for because Naaman had leprosy. And that was he was a powerful person because he was a general from up north. So you want to make knowledge of Naaman. Like I said, Attila, who was a queen in Judah for 7 years. 7 years, okay. Jehoshaphat, okay. She was important because her brother was the husband to Attila. And when he died, she went on a rampage, Attila killing all of her kids. And Jehoshaphat, the aunt, snuck away Joash and hid him in the temple for 7 years. And that's how the line of David takes back over.
Wow.
Okay? So that's important. So you're like, what is these? So when it's being listed in Matthew or Luke, you're like, oh my goodness, what does this have to do? And what is this?
Eliezer.
Right. So it's like, man, these people are, whew. Okay, so key places. Key places, one is Samaria, which is the capital of the northern kingdom. That's what it's called. Israel is called Northern Kingdom. Okay? You'll see that interchanged. Judah is the Southern Kingdom. Okay? Other names that they will go by will be Ephraim. Ephraim is mentioned as the Northern Kingdom, and then Jerusalem is the Southern. Okay, those are different names, but they're also locations. If you look at Samaria is the capital of the Northern Kingdom. Jerusalem is the capital of the Southern Kingdom. Samaria is established, and it's on this map that kind of explains it to you. as the capital once Omri takes over as king, and that's in 1 Kings, okay? That's Ahab's dad. He sets it up for Samaria to be the kingdom for the northern kingdom for the rest of the time, okay? I find it fascinating. Let me just be real honest, because Judah, the term Jew comes from Judah, okay? After everybody's exiled, who comes back? Is only the people back to Jerusalem. That's how you get the term Jew. Because these 10 tribes up north are called the 10 lost tribes. They can't find them.
Wow.
So what ends up happening is the people become known as Samaritans. Hello, woman at the well that Jesus talked about.
Wow.
Hybrid. Like pigs.
Okay? And so you kind of can see the correlation after the exile by knowing this started out, they all started out the same, but through the separation and the exile, it goes into two different things. As I was studying, I was listening to a professor who said, do you not know that Jesus did the majority of his travel and his miracles in Samaria?
That is mind-blowing.
Why? Because the Jews didn't want him down there in Jerusalem.
Right, the righteous Jews.
Wow.
The saved ones.
Why? Because we're from the line of David. We're this and that. We got back what was ours.
Wow.
And they were not. They were mixed in. It was a mix, a plethora of everything. Once they had to come back because they were no longer pure Jews at that time, pure Hebrews. Really.
I think that's so interesting because even at that time with the woman at the well, she's like, don't you know that we have no, like, we have no part with dealings with one another.
Right.
So from then to then, still like that's
Right.
that's mind blowing.
It is. Very much so. And it's all due to what happens in Kings. Because the prophets are all just telling them, you did this wrong in Kings.
It's crazy.
So looking at that, you see that other places that are important is the Aram, which is the Assyrians that take over the northern kingdom. Constant fighting. Constant fighting. That's where you'll find a lot of the term Ben-Hadad, Ben-Hadad 2, Ben-Hadad 3. When, you know. Then you have the Moabites and the Edomites. It's on the map there. The Moabites, at this point down, this whole time, David's ruling and Solomon's ruling. They ruling the Moabites and the Edomites and all that, right?
Right.
The minute the decision starts to happen, uprisings start to take place. The Moabites are descendants of Lot. They were supposed to have been taken out.
Okay.
Okay? Because they didn't help when they was traveling through the 40 years. They didn't help them, so they were supposed to have been taken out. David didn't do that. David ran to the Moabites for help when Saul was chasing him. So that's important when you're looking at it to understand that. You know, the Edomites are descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. So can't nobody tell me that there was not sibling rivalry in the Bible. There was not some familiar hatred. That stuff went on for 400 years. That this family did this to do this. Makes me feel not so bad. All right. Babylon. You can kind of see Babylon comes from Persia to the east. So they're just past Ammon. They're not even really on the map. They come from the Middle East and come over to take it all, to become a powerhouse, okay? Then you have Egypt, which is down south, which is constantly knocking on the door. Always trying to, why is it always fighting over the land? Because it's about trade routes. It's about trade routes which lead to money, okay? So don't forget, trade routes that lead to money. Let's see, for this next 5 minutes, I'm gonna go over real quick. Open up to 2 Kings. And we're gonna actually hit this video. I don't know if I want to, because it might messed it up, but we're gonna talk about how the kings are introduced. Because it's important to remember that part. And I promise you, you're about done after that. Okay? And I think I was looking at, you can open up to any king in 2 Kings. The first ones that I'm going to talk about is a Judean king. So as long as it's a Judean king, which is a Judah. Let's look at, I am looking at chapter 14. And I'll just open it up. In the 2nd year of Israel's king Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, Amaziah, son of Joash, became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king and reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoadan and was from Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the Lord's eye, but not like his ancestor David. Okay, so when they're talking about kings in the book of Kings from Judah, okay, there's a couple of different things they list in their introduction. Of course, they introduce their name. You're going to get the name of the king, right? You always get the name of the king. You're going to get their father's name. You're always going to get the father's name. That's how they remember it's coming through the line of David. Then you're going to get who they followed in the accession. Okay? So who they that. And then they're going to link it with the king from Israel. So you'll always get who they came after, but then who reigned at the time that they started to reign in Israel. That's a basic introduction. Then you'll get their age. You're going to get how old they are when they came into the throne. You're going to get how long they reigned. And then you're going to get the name of their mom. This is going to be the introduction, and I haven't found where it's been different. Then it'll just, then you'll get where they stayed. This should always be Jerusalem for them, because that's the capital. Then you're going to get an evaluation of their reign.
Yeah.
How did they do? Based on David.
David, yeah. That's good.
Did they do good? Did they do bad? How did they do? And it's going to be based upon, again, because they're king, their character, morale, and spiritual leadership. That's what they're being judged on as king. How do they lead the people? How do they do? Okay? And then, if there's anything else that takes place, they'll list anything else that's important. This basic information is why some can be short and some can be long. Because if it was a bad king, what it has been found in the studies is that the evil kings reign shorter time than the good kings. On average, evil kings reign 7 years, and on average, good kings reign 33. And that is, I heard one professor say, that is God's way of balancing it without mankind needing to balance anything.
Wow.
That's deep.
Okay?
Wow.
Jehovah Jireh.
And it also, in the closing, it identifies where the king was buried, who he was buried with, and it announces his successor. If we jump down, it's talking about everything Amaziah did. You know, it says he did right. He put away the high places, but he didn't kill the people who worship false gods. So he was semi-good, right? And then in verse, 15, the rest of the events of Jehoash's reign, along with his accomplishment, his might, and how he waged war against Amaziah, king of Judah, are written in the historical record of Israel's kings. And his son Jeroboam began king in his place. So you see that following, okay? That is the format for Judean kings. Any questions on that? I know that's a lot. Aaron, did you raise your hand? Okay.
And somewhere does it say toward the end, and the rest of his work or whatever can be found. in the book of?
That's a good question.
When it's saying that, what it's meaning is that it can be found in the book of Chronicles, or it can be found in the book of the King. Okay, each king had someone that chronically written down his reign. We don't have that though. This is not that book. This is actually a different book. So there's a book called the Acts of Solomon that they pull some information from to create First and Second Kings. There's the book of the Kings themselves, which is just called the Kings themselves, talking about their reign. And then there is also First and Second Samuel that has additional information that we don't have. That we just have this. And so when it's referencing those other books, it's talking about the other thing. But the closest one that we have is Chronicles. Any other questions about that? That's a lot, huh? All right, so now we go on to the description of the Israelite kings, because theirs is very, very similar, okay, except for they have the difference that they would have is it does list where they would reign, and there is a possibility that they might not be in Samaria, okay, because the fight was constantly going. It was where he took over, or he killed the last king, and so his location is important. But it'll primarily include all of this as well. It'll include, instead of the ascension with Israel, it'll include the ascension with Judah. So who was ruling Judah at the time he took over reign in Israel? It doesn't include, like I said, the mom's name. Let's see. And that's pretty much, so it's a little bit easier. Let's look at a Israel king. You look at in chapter 13. In the 37th, verse 10, in the 37th year of Judah's king Joash, Jehoshaphat, son of Jehoahaz, became king over Israel and Samaria and reigned 16 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He did not turn away from all the sin that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. And so Jehoash in verse 13 was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. When it comes to Israel, the comparison will be to Jeroboam, which is who is king in 1 Kings. And the reason there's a comparison to him is because he's the first one that separated the kingdoms. And then when he separated it, he established worshiping calves.
Wow.
Because he didn't want the people to return back to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. So they compare his evil as the worst. So they're compared to Jeroboam. Really.
I noticed there's like a common thread with some of the kings that always goes back to, and they were buried with their fathers. Does that only consist in like pretty much just with Israel, or is that just with Judah? Because it seems like
it depends. And here's why it depends. There is some prophecy. For example, Ahab's kids are not buried.
okay, yeah.
Right. Remember, Jezebel got eaten by dogs. They were slayed on the spot.
Wow.
So they weren't buried with kings. So it depends if there's a prophecy to go forth and where that takes place. Okay. But for the most part, the one that you can say is buried with the kings is in Jerusalem. Because that's establishing their lineage. They're buried, they had to do something really evil to not be buried in where David's buried.
Gotcha.
In Israel, they could be buried